So, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Chatham House, and welcome especially to His Excellency Sheikh Mohammed bin Abdulrahman bin Jassim Al Thani, the Foreign Minister of Qatar. And he is here to discuss today the title, very simply put, of The Crisis in the Gulf, Qatar Responds. And we're delighted to welcome Sheikh Mohammed for the first time to Chatham House. So, delighted to have the pleasure of hosting you here today. He has been visiting European capitals, and we were discussing, we're on a bit of a tour at the moment, to discuss the ongoing diplomatic crisis in the Gulf, which has really pitted Qatar against four key Arab states, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the UAE, and also Egypt. And certainly from a Chatham House perspective, as for everyone here in this room and outside as well, this conflict really is causing or drawing a lot of attention. Multiple implications: the future of the Gulf Cooperation Council, the future of the fight against Daesh, how Arab diplomacy towards Iran will pan out, and obviously, very importantly, the kinds of relationships the United States, Britain, other countries will have with Qatar and with its neighbors in the future, from military cooperation right through to business linkages and investment. Now, as you all know, the four governments announced a decision to sever diplomatic transportation links on the 5th of June with Qatar, along with some other measures. 23rd of June, a series of 13 demands were made of Qatar, with a deadline, I think it was of Monday morning, extended by a couple of days. And as we're meeting here right now, those four Arab states are meeting in Cairo to assess the response that was delivered to Emir Sabah Sheikh Sabah of Kuwait, which is mediating on Monday. So, Sheikh Mohammed, thank you very much for coming to share your perspectives with us on the record here at Chatham House. We'll have opportunity for questions afterwards. Sheikh Mohammed became the Foreign Minister of Qatar in January 2016. He'd been Assistant Foreign Minister prior to that for international cooperation. He served as Director of Economic Affairs in the Supreme Council of Family Affairs. He's also held senior positions in the Emiri Diwan under the former Emir Hamad bin Khalifa. So, Sheikh Mohammed, welcome. We look forward to your remarks, and I'll say to everyone we will then have an opportunity for a good half an hour, 40 minutes to take questions and comments from you before we close. Welcome.
Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great honor to be here today, and I would like to thank Dr. Robin Nibelt, Director of Chatham House, for inviting me and for that very kind introduction. I'm sure most of you are following the latest developments, and you know that Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, and Bahrain have imposed political, economic, and social blockade against our country. Some of the audience here who follow Arabic media outlets would have noticed that double narrative that the blockading countries have been using, one for the Western audiences and one for their own people. The one for their own people comes as they fail to justify their unjust measures against a neighboring country in the holy month of Ramadan. As you know, sympathy with Qatar is now criminalized in some of these countries, an indicator of how unpopular this escalation has been in the countries that caused it. Before I delve into the background of the current GCC crisis, allow me to discuss with you Qatar's foreign policy, and I am ready to answer any and all questions you may have. What distinguishes Qatar in the region is not its wealth, nor its natural resources, nor is it in its high rising building. It's the fact that the development is at the core of both its domestic and foreign policy. Today, Qatar has distinct economic situation and the highest level of transparency, and most importantly, the highest level of security and stability in the Middle East and North African region. Qatar ranks the first in the world in most efficient government, according to the World Economic Forum. Regionally, Qatar ranks first in countering administrative corruption and the adoption of judicial procedures to protect the rule of law. In regards to human potential, Qatar also the first. This development emanates from the principles of good governance, as Qatar ranked first in the world in terms of confidence in political decision-making, and second in the level of efficiency of legislative system. Qatari women have been partners in this development with their participation in the labor force and access to education reaching unprecedented heights. Qatar today is home to the highest proportion employed women in the GCC, and women outnumber men in university education. This development was witnessed also through freedom of worship in Qatar, with donations from the former Emir of Qatar towards the construction of the largest church in the GCC. For more than 20 years, Qatar has advanced interfaith dialogue, as Doha has been a platform for dialogue for religious leaders and political factions alike. Qatar has continued to encourage various political viewpoints to engage in a constructive discussion in Doha, providing a platform otherwise absent in the region. Media broadcasters hosted by Qatar have completely transformed the Arab world, with the Al-Jazeera network giving airtime without prejudice to social and cultural topics as well as political movements, whether leftist, liberal, or Islamist, which were otherwise stifled across the region. The need for a free, non-partisan media which addressed the concerns of the Arab citizens was badly felt, and Qatar's willingness to host institutions such as Al Jazeera undoubtedly endeared the country to the wider Arab public. Qatar's media policies were warmly received by the Arab public as well as in the United States and Europe. In contrast, they created resentment among the forces which had previously been able to control the flow of information throughout the Middle East. This resentment intensified following the popular revolution known as the Arab Spring of 2011. Arab regimes, surprised by the scale of popular protests, chose to avoid accountability by blaming the media. For the first time in the Middle East and North Africa region, Qatar hosted televised debates known as BBC Doha debates, where no government official or official body or broadcasters has any control over what's said at the sessions or who is invited. This created a forum for dialogue that challenged the status quo. Again, something unprecedented in the region. Today, Qatar has one of the most highly educated population in the region, the highest per capita GDP in the world, a thriving diversified economy, some of the finest educational institutions in the Middle East, if not the world, and of course a World Cup to look forward in 2022. Above all, and unlike many states in the Middle East, Qatar was not built on oppression, fear, and censorship. And through it all, we have continued to chart our own course and take an independent view on global and regional events. On the regional stage, Qatar has mediated in a nearly 10 regional and international portfolios in less than 8 years, from 2008 until 2016, exerting diplomatic and political efforts at the regional and international levels in mediating between factions, entities, and countries, with the request of the concerned parties, and without interfering in the internal affairs of others, with a view to achieve convergence of views and find sustainable solution for conflict and differences. Let me briefly recap some recent events. Beginning in April, Qatar was subjected to a carefully orchestrated and unprecedented smear campaign designed to misrepresent our policies and our positions on key issues affecting our region. The climax of that campaign came on May 24, when the website of our official news agency was hacked, and fake quotes attributed to our Emir were posted online. Some fake quotes with my name of them were also sent out on our Twitter feed. Once we sorted out the technical details, we sent urgent messages to all of the news organizations in the region, alerting them to the false statements that had been posted on our website. Almost all of them immediately issued corrections and alerted their readers and viewers that the fabricated statements were actually fake news and lies, except that is for the news outlets in Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates and Egypt, which continued to report the fake news as fact. It continued. It is worthy to note that Qatar news outlets were censored in these blockading countries 2 hours before the fabricated news was published. Furthermore, officials from the blockading countries were not merely criticizing Qatar's policy, something we have always welcomed, but they were calling for regime change in Qatar, a coup, and inciting hate and violence. Through the hacking incident was quickly exposed, Saudi Arabia and UAE used it as the pretext for launching an unprovoked, unwarranted, and unjustified blockade for Qatar on June 5th. For almost 3 weeks after June 5th, we have been asking for specific demands, as our neighbors decided to put the cart before the horse. And only under international and especially American pressure, they did. On June 23rd, presented us with a list of 13 demands that they said we had to meet by July 3rd. It was immediately apparent to us that they did not represent reasonable and actionable grievances against Qatar, as the US Secretary of State had hoped. And they were not measured and realistic, as the UK Foreign Secretary said they should be. Instead, Qatar was asked to curtail free expression, hand over individuals at risk of torture and arbitration, reduce its defense capabilities, go against international law, outsource its foreign policy to Riyadh and Abu Dhabi, and literally sign an open check to the blockading countries to pay unlimited amount of money described as compensation. The ultimatum did not only demand the shutting down of Al Jazeera, but also other news outlets based here in the United Kingdom that represent free press for the people of the Middle East. Reading between the lines, the blockading countries were demanding that we must surrender our sovereignty as the price for ending the siege, something they knew Qatar would never do. For the record, these demands and accusations were never channeled to us previously. In fact, for the first time, a summit of all GCC foreign defense and interior ministers was held in Riyadh on the 27th of April, and the ministerial meeting and the summit followed in May. There were no grievances or requests discussed. Clearly, the blockading countries did not submit their demands with expectation that they would provide a framework for resolving their differences with Qatar. Had they actually been interested in addressing the issue, they would have used the mechanism specified in the GCC Charter, specifically the arbitration mechanism outlined in the 2014 Riyadh Agreement, which they claim Qatar violated. The neighboring countries violated the Riyadh Agreement that states that member governments must take their grievances to the GCC executive body first, before taking action against any GCC member. Most of the demands were only of interest to our Arab neighbor, but the allegation that Qatar supports terrorism was clearly designed to generate anti-Qatar sentiment in the West. But how about Qatar policies that deal with terrorism directly? Well, I can say with confidence that we have been anything but soft on terrorism. As the blockading countries know, Qatar has passed stringent laws and regulation to ban the financing of terrorism by private individuals and so-called charities. We work with the intelligence and security services of the UK and the US and all of the countries in our region to bring terrorists and their supporters to justice. Alongside its security and surveillance and its coordination and the sharing of information with its allies in the war on terror, the state of Qatar is also committed to ending the social and political factors conducive to terrorism. Qatar works against ideologies which entrap young men and women into terrorism, as well as the tyranny and state violence which induce terrorism, while investing 12% of its government spending on education. Qatar has allocated 25% of its foreign aid toward education and believe that education is the cornerstone of stability and the most effective preventive measure for extremism. This is why Qatar has invested in educating 7 million children in 42 countries. We know that terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh have put our government, just like the governments of all of the Gulf nations, on their list of enemies. More importantly, the challenges of transnational terrorism is not unique to Qatar, but it is a regional and a global threat that requires a collective effort and a political commitment from all. Qatar opposes violent extremism that is a global threat to all humanity. However, what other countries fail to grasp is labeling political opponents as terrorists. Merely silence them regardless of how we may feel about their agendas is both unjustified and fails to solve any problem. Not only morally wrong, it would likely make the problem worse by driving more people into radicalism and divert attention away from the battle against the genuine terrorist. We are very much concerned about how politicized the label terrorism might come out of this crisis. Should Western governments not take a clear position towards this manipulation of concepts and terminology? As I indicated in my introduction, this manipulation has already and will continue to obscure the real source of violent extremism, as some of our neighbors label political dissident as terrorists. We feel that demonizing people who are presenting legitimate grievances peacefully and oppressing movements advocating for peaceful change only drives well-meaning people into arms of extremists. And we feel that keeping independent news and information from the eyes and ears of the people only demonstrates fear and weakness. These issues are at the heart of our disagreements with our neighbors, and they are serious issues. But here is the crux of the matter. We have seen how young people left without hope for a better future turn to violence in the name of jihad. And we have watched as the world blames Islam for this tragedy. This must stop. As the Emir of Qatar has said, the problem is not Islam, it is hopelessness. And the causes of that hopelessness too often are governments that fail to meet the needs of their people. I know that this message will not be well received in some of our neighboring capitals, but there are serious problems in the Middle East region, and silencing Qatar will not solve them. The answer to our disagreement is not blockades and ultimatums. It is dialogue and reason. We in Qatar are always open to both, and we welcome any serious efforts to resolve our differences with our neighbors. The nations of the Middle East, all of us, face enormous challenges, both externally and internally. In Qatar, we believe that we have better opportunity to meet these challenges if we work on them together. And we always welcome dialogue and negotiations. All that I have described here this afternoon begs the central question: why did the blockading countries take these extraordinary, unprovoked, and hostile actions against Qatar? Put another way, why is Qatar independence such a threat to them? I think it's because we have different views on politics and governance in the Middle East, and about the best path forward for our collective future. In Qatar, we believe that citizens everywhere should have the right to a government that is responsive to their needs and representative of their interests. We are not a democracy. This is a fact, and we don't claim otherwise. But our system of consultative monarchy enjoys widespread and enthusiastic support from our people. It also facilitates various channels to allow policy feedback. And this is the very reason why Qatar was not alarmed by the Arab people's uprising in 2011. This is why the Qatari government, unlike many of our neighbors, never felt threatened by the Arab Spring movement. It's why we have confidently opened our doors to political groups who are advocating for change, whether we agree with them or not. And it's why Al Jazeera, as independent news network, helps inform Arab and the wider world alike about the social, political, and economic developments in the region. For the record, Al Jazeera did and continues to look critically at all Arab countries, including Qatar, hosting opposing and alternative views daily, something that does not exist anywhere else in the region. Our neighbors see change, those advocating for it, and those reporting on it, as a threat. And they are quick to label anyone who opposes their governments as a terrorist. In Qatar, we embrace change. We welcome constructive criticism in order to develop. Qatar has never undermined the collective security of the region, as we believe that any threat to the region is a threat to Qatar. As the 48 hours extension is coming to an end, Qatar continues to call for dialogue despite the violations of international laws and regulation, despite the separation of 12,000 families, despite the siege that is a clear aggression and an insult to all international treaties, bodies, and jurisdictions. Looking at the way forward, we must lay out any and all legitimate concerns and discuss the claims and allegations through presenting evidence and engaging in a constructive dialogue. Qatar stands ready to engage in a negotiations process with a clear framework and set of principles that guarantee that our sovereignty is not infringed upon. Thank you again, ladies and gentlemen, for your kind attention. And now I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions. Thank you.
Sheikh Mohammed, thank you very much for those fulsome remarks and for putting things in context at the beginning, as you did as well, in terms of the kind of philosophy that you argued Qatar is undertaking in the region. We've got time for some questions, but could I just come in with one right at the beginning? Because I think you said there, especially when you said at the end that Qatar believes in, you said, we're not a democracy, we believe in consultative democracy. And I would have thought, sorry, a consultative royalty, exactly, a consultative royalty. And a consultative royalty is precisely the system of government I can imagine that Adal Jubeir or others would be describing as well. So is it really about surrendering your sovereignty, or do you think this dispute is about surrendering Qatar's foreign policy? The belief that the Gulf Cooperation Council, in a way, should have one foreign policy rather than competing foreign policies. And Syria in particular has become a place where that competition seems to be playing out. Do you think there's something you could be doing differently in your foreign policy that would not make this a battle about sovereignty?
Well, first of all, Qatar never compromised the collective security of the Gulf Cooperation Council. And this is already witnessed in the past decades. Regarding the independence of Qatar foreign policy, this is very important, I think, factor in this disagreement or this conflict resulted to the blockading of the state of Qatar. You cannot impose foreign policy because you are a member of an organization. Even when it comes to the European Union, which they have more coherent maybe foreign policy, there are some sort of differences between the different countries, and this has never been accepted by any sovereign nation. As I have mentioned in the statement earlier, that we believe that mainly the main issue is not about terrorism. The main issue is opposing differences and the way to shut the other voice. And maybe they are looking at Qatar that it's punching over its weight. And I think all these things should be taken in consideration when it comes for motives for the region. And regarding that we are a consultative monarchy or something which we claim that Qatar is more progressive than the other nations in the Gulf, we have seen that, first of all, Qatar has a constitution which is voted by the people. And this constitution stated that there will be an elected parliament. There are a lot of questions around when this parliament election will take place. And it's supposed to take place in 2013. We had the transition of power between the father Amir and the Emir, and there are some legislative development in place. And the desire and the willingness and the political willingness of the government is there, and things will might be realized soon.
My first visit to Doha was in 2009, and the discussion then was about there being a consultative parliament and that it would be happening very soon. And then we have 2013, and then there's another reason not to do it, and now it's 2017. So is this surely, this sounds more like it's an ambition that does not actually distinguish Qatar?
Well, this is something, as I have mentioned to you, there are some legislative issues which we have to work on. We want to do something which can serve the purpose. And currently, the people, they have all the means to send their feedback to the government and to the leadership of the country if there is any issue. And I have mentioned there that we are not democracy, but we are responsive to our people's demands. And this is always happening in Qatar on a continuous basis. The people has an access to the leadership of the country at least once a month, and to the top leadership. So they don't need to appoint a representative for the time being to deliver their demands when they are having this direct access. There are a lot of factors which are really maybe the people inside Qatar, they are not sensing this similar urgency. You are looking at it from outside.
But the direct access, when it's a nation of 250,000 nationals, 230,000 nationals, is a lot more possible, yes, than, let's say, if you're Saudi Arabia or something. So you can, there are differences which perhaps give Qatar the flexibility that others don't have. Let me get up, because I have I'm sure a lot of people ask questions. Please let us know who you are. Simply saying Chatham House member won't quite be enough unless that's the only way you really want to do it. Gentleman here first. I've got a couple of questions here. I'll come there. Yeah.
Your Excellency.
Yeah, it'll come on. Just keep going.
Your Excellency, Sheikh Mohammed, thanks very much for your speech. My name is James Clancy, a member of Chatham House. The question is, today...
It's good. He's a friend, member of Chatham House. It's good.
Yeah, the question is that today Qatar Airways has not been relieved of the laptop ban in the same way as Etihad and Emirates had. Do you think this is a result of a message being sent from the White House to Qatar to put pressure on you, or a result of the huge amount of money being spent on corporate lobbying and PR by the UAE and Saudi?
Well, this is actually this is a procedure is done through the agencies, they call it the TSA procedure, which is normally they are not sending a teams to inspect the security procedures in each and every airport, And we have them already in Doha. I think they arrived yesterday. So this is an ongoing process, and so I think irrelevant to the entire situation.
Please here, Lise, you had your hand first.
From the BBC, welcome, Your Excellency. In your remarks, you mentioned that some of the demands were meant for the region and some were meant to gain sympathy in the West. Without prejudicing the mediation done through Kuwait, I wonder if you could tell us a little bit about your response to those demands which you submitted in Kuwait on Monday. And secondly, I wonder, with regards to your emphasis on not promoting terrorism, would you say that when the new emir came into power in 2013, you looked at the financing of groups in countries like Syria, whereas you know for a long time money was just being thrown in and nobody knew where it went, and some of it did go to groups which are on the UN sanctions list as being linked to Al-Qaeda or later then to so-called Islamic State? Thank you.
Two questions there, you better finish.
Well, first, regarding the first part of the question, our response to the 13 demands. We mentioned yesterday in the press conference that we cannot disclose the content of the response as out of respect for the Kuwaitis mediators, and just to let you know that it is within the framework of the international law and something which is not infringing the sovereignty of the state of Qatar. Regarding terrorism financing and all those allegations which are mentioned in the list of demands and even in their statements and what's continued to be mentioned in their media, I believe this is something being used as I have mentioned in the statement, that it is to gain sympathy with the West, and it's more syllable accusation for the West, and so they are going to find a support to the measures they have been taken against us. Qatar has committed itself and the country and all the reforms which took place in the country to stop funding to go to the wrong hands, either whether it's in Syria or any of the conflict zone. There are a lot of legislations being reformed and changed, and there are any person who is involved in such an act, they are getting prosecuted and convicted by that, including the people who are in the United Nations sanction list, which you have just mentioned, and maybe they are trying to use it to promote themselves. All the people who are listed in the United Nations sanction list, first of all, there are travel bans being imposed to them, against them, their accounts being frozen, and they are under 24/7 surveillance, and the reporting submitted to the United Nations within, according to the measures of the resolution, and they are prosecuted in the court, and some of them already been convicted, and the others, they are still in the prosecution. None of them we didn't take any action against it. And some of even the people who are listed in the United Nations and they are considered Qataris, they are not in Qatar until now. So we cannot impose any measure on them while they are outside. There is, I think, one individual who is still, or who left to Syria since 2007, and he never came to Qatar. So regarding Qatar funding, even to our fund, the government fund never goes to any radical group, because our funding is always channeled through an agreed mechanism between the group of countries who are supporting the moderate opposition, and this mechanism goes to the moderate opposition to support them for in their resistance against the brutality of Bashar al-Assad regime. So Qatar commitment is always firm about terrorism financing, and we believe that if we are going to allow anyone to run freely with this terrorism financing, this will represent a threat for Qatar more than anyone else.
Question here first, please. Lady here.
May Yamani, I'm an academic member of Chatham House, and my question is about the future of the Gulf Cooperation Council. And we have seen when it was established in '81 that the flourishing but fragile states were going to be united against Iraq at the time, but especially Iran. And we knew that it was like the tribal saying of أنا وأخويا على ابن عمي وأنا وابن عمي على الغريب. I and my brother against my cousin, and my cousin against the outsider. Now we see the fracture and this crisis, and what is the position, for example, of Oman and then Kuwait, and what impact with this conflict or crisis is going to have on the future of that Gulf?
First, I think we have to go back to May 21st when we had the GCC summit, and just 2 days before the cyber attack on the news agency. We had an agreement that the Gulf countries should have a common strategy in addressing the threats for the collective security of the Gulf countries. Then it followed by another meeting with the President of the United States, showing that the Gulf countries is an important and strategic ally for the United States, and we have to address one common threat, which is terrorism. And all those countries are agreeing on this set of agendas. And suddenly, in one day, we saw that there is a diversion from this goal to attack Qatar rather than addressing terrorism, and really to represent more obstacles and having not concentrating our efforts on fighting the real terrorists, either through the global coalition of countering Daesh and others. So this raises a big question mark about the future of the Gulf countries when they are really having their priorities among themselves, fighting themselves, and try to hijack the decision making from an independent country to be in another country, or it is an exercise which is historical, where the big countries are always trying to bully the small countries. So I think if we are not going to have a proper dialogue which will get us to a solution, a sustainable solution, which respects the country's sovereignty and base these solutions on equality, we are setting a precedent for the future which might be a challenge for other countries in different regions. So the international community should not allow something like this to happen. And whatever framework of the relationship or whatever social contract will be in the future between the Gulf countries should set the principles to protect each country's sovereignty. Oman's position has been against any problem or any crisis arise in this challenging time where we have enough conflicts around us. Kuwait are the same. All of them, they are trying to help in de-escalation and bring the issue back to the table and negotiate a just solution for all the countries.
Do you think, just as Mayimani raised Iran, I mean, you described earlier that Qatar takes a kind of different approach to dealing with political dissent, as you say, creating opportunity rather than demonizing groups. Is part of the problem here within the GCC you take the same approach to Iran, that the relationship economically, politically is closer, and therefore the foreign policy is sufficiently different? What could you say about Qatar's policy towards Iran specifically? Could it be different? One of the first point on the list of demands was to evict any members of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard. Now, that may be an extreme statement. You will say one way or the other. But is there something different about the policy towards Iran that our audience here should know about that is part of the problem?
Well, the first demand actually is stating how baseless is this list, and talking about severing ties or downgrading the representation diplomatic representation of Iran and or also expelling the IRGC who are present in Qatar, I would invite any one of you to come to visit Qatar and see how many IRGC guards we have. But despite all this, just to tell you more about our policy toward Iran, we have been always, first of all, Iran is a neighboring country. We cannot change geography. We cannot just cut Qatar and move it away to New Zealand or somewhere else. And we have to live live along each other. We have a shared interest with them. Our gas field is a partnership between Qatar and Iran. We have a trade relationship which actually ranked the 5th among the Gulf countries, by the way, where 96% of the GCC and Iran trade is with UAE, and it is one of the blockading countries and asking us to severing ties with Iran. The Emir of Qatar has stated clearly in the General Assembly in 2015 that we have to engage in a serious dialogue between the Gulf countries and Iran. And Qatar always positioned that we have to have a healthy and constructive relationship with Iran, and based on principles which is mainly non-intervention in any of the other countries' affairs. So we don't accept intervention in our own affairs, and we don't accept to intervene in any other country's affairs. And then the Gulf leaders also, after the re-election after the election, of the parliament, not of the president of Iran sent for His Highness Sheikh Sabah, asking him for engaging in a dialogue with the Gulf countries, and Sheikh Sabah has led these efforts in order to develop a common position, and Qatar has participated with the other Gulf countries, and we were implementing the GCC leaders' decision to develop the principles and start developing a roadmap to engage in a dialogue, in a GCC-Iran dialogue. So Qatar has nothing different than the other Gulf states, or supposed to be not a different position, because this is what we have agreed in the meeting. If they have another position unique individually, we don't know. But Qatar is always calling for dialogue and calling for a constructive and positive relationship with Iran and with all other countries.
Thank you. First, William, you're here first. Right in the front, second row back. Got to come there. Yeah.
William Patey, Control Risks. Your Excellency, you have many friends in this room, many friends of the GCC as a whole. I count myself amongst them, who would love to see this dispute resolved through negotiation, and we wish the mediation of Kuwait every success. But from what you say and from what others are saying, as a former diplomat, it doesn't seem to me as if this is a dispute that will end soon. And there is much talk of upping the ante, financial sanctions, other sanctions against Qatar. Are there circumstances in which you could see Qatar cutting off the gas from Qatar to the UAE and Oman through the Dolphin project?
Former ambassadors always ask questions like that.
Well, I think Qatar supplies to UAE and to Oman I'm not sure if the number is right, but it's around 30 to 40% of UAE electricity is coming from Qatar. 80% of Dubai electricity is coming through Dolphin project. And we have mentioned earlier that even if we have any political conflict, we cannot mix the cards together. And I think this should be, because this is Qatar's reputation even in the future, and we are not willing to put this reputation in jeopardy. That we are using our whatever economic power we have as a political leverage on other countries. And second, we don't see that the people of Dubai or of UAE deserve to be affected because of this political conflict. And we are sure that they are going to be affected if we are going to cut off the gas supply. And we believe that it's a huge mistake for the blockading countries when they impose these measures against the state of Qatar and representing themselves as liberal economies and open skies, while they are using now all those means as a political leverage to pressure Qatar and to pressure other countries to cut off with Qatar and follow the same course. So our bet is really on the longer term, that Qatar sit as a trustworthy economic partner for any company and attractive for the foreign investments. And the others bet are really in the short term that they can pressure Qatar.
First here at the front. Microphone coming, please. I'll get you, sir. Yeah.
Jonathan Ruckman from Channel 4 News. Minister, wasn't the final straw for the Saudis your decision to pay hundreds of millions of dollars in ransom money to free Qatari princes, money which may have ended up in Iran? And secondly, are you worried that you will be suspended from the GCC?
Well, first, regarding the money which is in Iraq, we have clarified this issue officially from the government of Qatar and the government of Iraq. The funds were going to the government of Iraq, and now it is with the government. It's not with Qatar. And we have stated this officially, that all the funds which was going, I mean, if we are going to pay ransoms or doing anything like this, we wouldn't take the funds visibly in front of everyone. And it's already to support the Iraqi efforts. And there were some misunderstanding in this issue. And the Prime Minister of Iraq has stated clearly that there is no funds went to any militia. And I visited the Prime Minister of Iraq right after the release of the hostages. We don't see that the Iraqi government deserve just to accuse them that they are facilitating for those groups, because they need support from us, from all the Gulf countries. And in their fights now against terrorism, we have to be helpful for them, and we have to be a reliable partner for them, and to fill the vacuum which has been left by the Arab countries. And this is a role which Qatar was willing to play, but because of the hostages issue, we couldn't afford it. But right now we are coordinating very closely with the Iraqi government. I'm sorry, the second part of your question.
Will be suspended from the GCC?
No, they cannot take such a decision, because it should be by consensus.
So the others, yeah, there won't be a consensus, is what you're saying. You could be, but there is not a consensus. Gentleman there, yeah.
Thank you. Wael Tamimi, Al Arabi TV. Welcome to London, Mr. Foreign Minister. The countries that are blockading Qatar are convening now in Cairo. And we are hearing that they will reject maybe your response that you handed over to the Emir of Kuwait on Monday. Are you prepared for such scenario? More sanction, even isolation and divorce, as they call it. What happens next? And second, has Qatar been at any time during this crisis under direct military threat by these countries? Thank you.
Well, regarding the meeting of the blockading country which is taking place now in Cairo, we don't know what they are going to come out with, but we have done our part of this when we submitted the responses, which is out of respect for the Emir of Kuwait, that we are responding to such demands which is considered offensive for any country. So this is our part of the job, I think, is already done, and it's their part. And they are the aggressors, and they are the countries which launch an attack on Qatar by imposing all these measures. So they shouldn't expect from me the first step. I should expect from them the first step for the engagement. Whatever measures they are going to take, there is an international law which everyone should respect. And the international law doesn't allow any countries to do whatever they are doing right now against an independent state. And we believe that we believe in respecting the international law, and we believe that the international organization at the end will put an end for this and bring justice to the state of Qatar. And whatever measures they want to take, Qatar is now. We took the first shock, and we are ready to move ahead with our people, and we are going to do whatever it takes to protect our people, which is normal for any country.
You've got the World Cup coming up in 2022. I mean, that presents an additional level of pressure. One would normally think, you know, countries put under sanctions can maybe play the long game. We've seen Russia or other countries when the sanctions aren't complete, or it's not a complete blockade. I mean, could you just say something about that? What vulnerabilities do you think Qatar faces right now specifically? Could you play out the long term? Could you handle this for 3, 4, 5 years?
Well, yeah, I think what we have done in the last few weeks since the blockade being imposed against Qatar, we developed different alternatives, and we are continuing developing of alternatives for ways to ensure the supply chain for the country not to be cut off. And whatever for the short term, there is of course there is a extra cost will be occurred, but at the end we are working that the medium term that this will be a sustainable solution. And even if they are going to keep the blockade or left the blockade, we have, as a country, we have to rely on ourselves and to ensure that we deliver a World Cup which will be an attractive for the entire world.
And you may end up, though, as a result, relying more on Iran, more on Turkey, just for alternative supplies, supply chains, protection. That then exacerbates the very conflict that we're in the first place. So this is difficult.
But we have Kuwait and Oman as well. So
okay. Kuwait and Oman as well, just in case people didn't hear that. Right. Let me keep going on the questions. Gentlemen, I'm very patiently here. Sorry, most of the hands are at the front, so I'm taking them from the front. If I see hands at the back, I'll look at them.
Aftab Siddiqui, I'm an independent analyst and member of Chatham House. Question I have is, like, we had Donald Trump's visit on 20th of May, and then within 2 weeks, there was this blockade coming in. So did Qatar kind of miss some telltale signs at that point of time when Donald Trump was in Saudi, or at his visit in Saudi? And second question is, my observation is, like, Qatar and Iran relatively give a little bit of more freedom of speech to their citizens. Is West really sort of, helping you out in terms of, in this very difficult time, to sort of, protect those sort of, basic sort of, human rights issue within Iran and Qatar? So what is your view, sort of, or what is your understanding during your visits to the capitals, please? Thank you.
Well, regarding the visit of the President of the United States, I just mentioned earlier in the statement that nothing being raised, either it's in the Ministerial Council of the GCC or in the summit, and even within the summit, GCC and US, and even in the bilateral meeting which took place between the Emir and the President. So we didn't see anything raised from the United States government, and we believe that this conflict is originated and driven mainly by the Gulf countries, the three of the Gulf countries who are imposing the blockade in coordination with Egypt. They used maybe as one of the reasons, one of many reasons in their statements, that we violated Riyadh, what they call it, I think Riyadh communique or Riyadh declaration after Trump visit, but they used others as well. So it's not a big deal to link them together. Regarding the freedom of speech, I think what we sensed in the European capitals we were visiting, there is an understanding that the blockade is illegal, and it meant also to stop the free speech, free media in Qatar. And it's not about the free speech, free media, it's the independence of the policy making. It is the institutions which are hosted in Qatar. It is think tanks, universities which are in Qatar. All these actually have been questioned earlier in 2014 during the rift which resulted the withdrawal of the ambassadors in 2014. And also we understand the position of countries in Europe and United Kingdom and the United States, that all of the Gulf countries are their allies. So they want this issue to be solved, which we have. This is something we have in common. They don't want any escalation, and we agree with them, and they want to support a GCC process, and this is something which we are always calling for. But from the humanitarian aspect, we have a lot of issues which the European countries has been very vocal on. Free speech, yes, is one of them, but also the humanitarian situation, which is a result for this blockade in Qatar. Until now, we have more than 12,000 humanitarian cases, families being separated in Qatar. So because of this blockades, we have children who are living away from their mothers, or we have wives living away from their husbands, and we have families being teared up because of these measures. There are other issues like shutting any voice in their countries, show any sympathy with Qatar, which is, if we are talking about terrorism, this is intellectual terrorism, which we think. This is something you cannot even prevent people from expressing their views if they are against or showing just some sympathy with a country to open doors or to have bridges for a way back. So we believe all these measures being taken against Qatar exposed the real reason behind the entire move.
We've got about 5 minutes, and I've got 2 or 3 people who've been waiting very patiently. Do you mind, Forrest? I'll just take some questions together, and we'll keep a list. Gentleman here first has been waiting.
My name is Abdullah Humud. I'm a journalist and a member of Chatham House. The first point is related to the blockade concept. I have a problem with this concept since people are traveling in and out of Doha. So it doesn't look like a blockade, it is a boycott. And it looks like Qatar is upping the stakes to make life difficult. The second point is with regard to the November 2014 agreement, which was signed by Qatar. I'm not sure if any of the 13 demand was in that agreement and whether it was dealt with or not. The third point is related to the Turkish contingent in Qatar. What the Turkish soldiers could do, which the Americans in Al-Udeid base could not. Is hyperactive Qatar overreacting?
Okay, so just hold those thoughts, because they may come back to. I think we'll get a little cluster here, and then I'll keep track of them as well. The lady just there behind, please. Yeah, I'll come here.
Florence Gerici, a member of Chatham House. Your Excellency, you have pledged a significant investment in the UK in the lead up to Brexit, and I'm wondering if you have a message to the public here in the UK to perhaps reassure the public about that, and in turn about investors holding significant investments in your country and in the wider region.
If you pass the microphone just forward. Yeah. Sorry, it's going to go too forward, exactly. One there and then one here. He was there before you.
Thank you, Minister. Robert Gardner, Chatham House member. Does America have a foreign policy for the Middle East? And if it does, what is it?
I was hoping we would get a US question, actually.
The second question is the World Cup. What positive points did you put forward in order to obtain the World Cup, particularly if it's going to be played in the summer? Thank you very much.
Just pass it forward here, please.
Victor Bulmer Thomas, former director of Chatham House. There are 4 countries involved in this act of aggression against Qatar. It's very hard to believe that Bahrain or the UAE would have taken the initiative. That leaves 2 countries. Which of them is the ringleader, or are they both equally responsible?
It's what you can say when you're a former director of Chatham House. This is a So, yes, I've kept the list. We've got a few minutes. People are patient. I don't see them jumping away here, so I'll let you use your time on these questions. Blockade or boycott, 2014 agreement. I think a couple of questions really about the US. Is the US a foreign policy, and where does that aid the UK investment, and which is the key country that you need to focus on?
Well, regarding the concept of blockade versus boycott, I heard because a lot of voices about Qatar trying to exaggerate and to call it a blockade, not a boycott. I can just tell you that whatever been imposed on Qatar is illegal. When you are blocking the only land access I have where I can get the fresh food supplies, it is a blockade, it's not a boycott. When you are blocking the international skies from my flights to fly over, this is a blockade, this is not a boycott. It doesn't mean that blockade the people, they cannot leave the country. We can leave the country because we have one access via north from Iran. We are ensuring our food supplies by planes because Qatar has a resource to do that. Otherwise, the country would be in a blockade, not in a boycott. Qatar is paying 10 times extra cost for the shipping from the government funds because there is a funds available for that. But if Qatar is not in the same level of income, it wouldn't be able to cover the needs of its own people from medicine and food. And by the way, blockade being imposed on Libya and Iran some time before, and they never stop supplying foods or medicines. They never stop the people from flying in and out from Libya. And when there is a plane from a third country is flying to a fourth country and have a Qatari passenger and they are not allowing them to fly over their skies, this is a blockade. When you have a mother holding her 7-year-old children and pulling her son away from her and not allowing him to travel with her and not allowing her to stay with him, this is a blockade. This is inhuman and this is illegal. So I am sorry, no one can call it a boycott. Regarding Riyadh agreement in 2014 and what of the 13 demands is not in Riyadh agreement, actually Riyadh agreement never stated that there are demands just pointed to one country. Riyadh agreement is an obligation on all the Gulf countries. Riyadh agreement state a framework which should prevent the Gulf countries from having any future conflict and to provide a sustainable solution for any conflict to be solved. And they stated an arbitration mechanism in this agreement in order to avoid any escalation measures, which they never invoked. If we are going to talk about the violation of Riyadh agreement, I can list for you from now until tomorrow the list of violations they have violated Riyadh agreement with. Regarding, and by the way, the final point about Riyadh agreement never mentioned any measure to compromise the sovereignty or the independence of any country. Regarding the Turkish military cooperation or the Turkish base or whatever they want to call it, or are the Americans are not sufficient for our country, we would ask a question: why it is harmful for the Gulf that we have a Turkish military cooperation? Every country of the Gulf, they have a cooperation with different countries. Qatar has a military cooperation with the United States, with the United Kingdom, with France, with Turkey, with Canada, with a lot of other friendly nations, and Turkey is a NATO member. Qatar using this cooperation agreement to use Incirlik Air Base also in the global coalition counter Daesh. Qatar is using this for our military training. Why would it harm the other Gulf countries if we have a Turkish presence in the Gulf while There are other countries who have a Russian presence also in the Gulf, and maybe third countries will start to raise complaints. So we don't see a real reason behind it unless they want Qatar just to be with no military backup, or this is the only I can see it as a motive for them. Regarding the question of the investment in the UK and the amount which was pledged right after the Brexit, Qatar and the United Kingdom has around 100 years of relationship, and we have a confidence in the United Kingdom economy, and we have already invested £40 billion in the UK, and this is also when it's part of the strategy of Qatar Investment Authority, but number two, also showing the confidence on United Kingdom economy and the commitment for the partnership between Qatar and the United Kingdom, despite any steps will be taken by the United Kingdom. Regarding Middle East policy for United States, for me I can answer for Qatar. Qatar and United States has very strong and strategic relationship together. We are partners in defense, in security. We have political coordination, and we have a strong also economic and cultural cooperation, where we have 6 universities, 11,000 US soldiers, the largest air base, the center of command for the global coalition. There are a lot of efforts which is done between Qatar and the United States, and we believe that United States policy, which we have known for decades, never changed, that the Gulf countries are very important countries for the stability of the region, and as also a reliable partner for United States. The World Cup question about World Cup in the summer, I couldn't.
You covered that already. Yeah. Let's do the last one, I think, and we can let you off. Who is it? All 4 countries that are driving this, or do you think you need to focus your diplomatic efforts as Foreign Minister more in one particular direction?
Well, with all the respect for all the 4 countries, I cannot just undermine any of them. We believe that the entire campaign is mainly driven by Saudi and United Arab Emirates, and I think those are the countries we have to engage in what are the real motives and the real grievances behind it. The others, I mean Egypt or Bahrain, if they have their own reason, also they are welcome to present. But I think the main driver is Saudi Arabia and United Arab Emirates, and not our efforts, but any mediator efforts is trying to focus on them. This is what we noticed, not what we know.
Mohammed, thank you very much for taking so many questions. I think one thing we will take away from this discussion, especially when you mentioned at the end that really it's 2 of your closest neighbors, I think it was described as brothers and nephews, that this battle is with. This could go on for a bit. It's intractable, it's close. It's, I think we heard today, about foreign policy as much as anything, and really about a sense of national interest by all the parties concerned. So it's going to take a great deal of mediation and skill, outside and inside, to do it. We know you're in the middle of this. We appreciate you taking the time to share your thoughts here. I believe we're hoping we might get some other viewpoints over the next week or 2 at the same time. If we do, we'll keep you informed of that. But for the moment, a very strong hand for Sheikh Mohammed, please.